for every Arizona student.
With us as well as Casey Dreer. He's the Executive Director for the Voice of the People Association of Arizona, as well as the current President for the Foundation for Arizona Students. He has spent the past 7 years training student leaders by developing, organizing, and advocacy skills in Oregon and Arizona. Casey has worked to build student power and student voting bloc by overseeing the voter registration of over 60,000 new students since 2008. In his current role as Executive Director of EPA Arizona, Casey is facilitating a grassroots organizing, internship, and working on issues that expand and amplify the voice of the people in Arizona. Those issues include ridding our election system of dark money, and expanding student turnout through enhanced voter registration and outreach programs. Thank you, Casey, for joining us.
Also on our panel is Jimmy Arwood. Jimmy is an ambassador of the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Jimmy is a sophomore attending Arizona State University, majoring in public service and public policy, with a minor in sustainability and a concentration in business. He is also enrolled in Barrett, the Honors College. Jimmy is tremendously involved in student issues, being a key organizer in the Student March on the Capitol last spring. He has now turned his attention from activism toward policy work. He is starting his own student organization called Students for Affordable Tuition this fall. The Phoenix native is exceptionally passionate about politics, and he is currently interning with Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego. Jimmy is an ambassador for the Andrew Goodman Foundation, an organization dedicated to increasing voter turnout among students.
Unfortunately, Rosie Lopez wasn't able to join us today. She was feeling ill, so we just wanted to share that with the audience. So she's not here today. We're going to go ahead and move on to some guidelines about the event before we actually start. Please ask if we can silence our phones or put them on vibrate. We would greatly appreciate that. Also, because this is an open dialogue, we want to just be mindful of other people's perspectives. And so please don't be offended if someone has a different thought process than your own. This is just an open dialogue that we're having. Okay, so we may have some differences on viewpoints.
So the first article we're going to read is called College for the Masses. And if you open up your packet, it's right behind the agenda. Does everyone have a packet? I'll get you some packets right now.
College for the Masses.
College for the Masses, yes. This article is about the benefits of enrolling in a four-year college. So we're going to take a few minutes to read the article, and then we're going to open it up for questions to the panel.
The article can also be found on the screen. It's a summary of what you have.
We'll just spend one more minute on the article. Okay, is everyone almost finished? Does anybody have any questions on the article? Is college for everyone? If you have any questions, Meg will come around with the microphone. So do you all feel that college is for everyone?
Do you want to go ahead and share your opinion on why you think that college is for everyone?
Hello, my name is Ty Hunter. I think that everyone simply has a right to education and information. I think it's the right as a human being. I mean, without a doubt in my mind, there's no reason someone shouldn't have a right to education.
Okay. Do you have a question around that? Because the article was posting about the SAT test. There was I think a 10-point difference on that.
I think there's a lot of problems with the SAT test to begin with, honestly, and a lot of testing in high school. I don't know what the wording is, but in high schools in general.
Okay.
A question would be maybe, well, honestly, I really have to think about that.
Okay, we'll come back to you if you want to take a moment or two. Does somebody else in the audience have a question for anybody on our panel around this article? Or anything that you'd like to share about, if you can relate to this on some level?
I dare you.
What about the panelists? What do you feel about this?
Hi there, I'm Jimmy Arwood. I just want to first of all say thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here representing the students and representing the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Something that I've learned throughout the course of my education and reading Malcolm Gladwell's The Outliers was really people are born with certain advantages over others, and just the aspect that you look at professional hockey leagues in Canada and you see that most professional hockey players are born January through February through March because they have cutoff dates for their junior leagues. And so one student might be 9 months older than another player, giving him certain mature advantages over the other players. And you see that he gets selected for the higher teams. He gets selected to do much more training than the others. And so you see these clear advantages that he gets simply by being born right on the cutoff date. And so kind of looking at what Masai said, we have to examine education, because we see that there's even cutoff dates with education starting at kindergarten. And we can see that certain students are going to be will have more advantages over other students simply because they're older and they've seen more things. So we have to take that into account. And so really, I applaud you for making that comment, making that statement aside, because certain people have advantages and everybody should be on the same playing field. So I agree with you.
Does anybody have any thoughts on what Jimmy had to share? That some have more advantages than others? Yes.
Hi, this is for, in response to Jimmy or anyone on the panel. But in terms of having an issue with the cutoff date and how that creates like advantages for some and disadvantages for others, then what's really the solution? Because don't you have to draw the line somewhere? There'll always be at least one group that has to do it. So why not draw it around, our end of the year? There always will be one group that's disadvantaged. So give a solution otherwise.
Well, higher education in America is an institution. That means it's got structure. It's interesting, you began, by the way, the best ASU shirt ever. I don't know if everybody saw the photo, but it's really great. And how coincidental that you're here. But the articles didn't talk about the ethics at all. But that's where you began. You began your statement on the right of people to go to university, higher education. The articles were all about the operational feasibility, metrics of predicting success. And just as your insurance companies charge folks more for insurance, automobile insurance under the age of 24, because they've done calculus, and they know that the probability is that accidents are going to occur disproportionately there. There's a metric used to calculate the likelihood of success, and unfortunately, it's a series of academic indicators. That's why they look at GPA, courses taken, you know the ritual, you're all in school. Other indicators that there will be a motivation will drive somebody through at least the undergrad experience. And you could find fault with every one of those metrics. What I thought was really interesting is that by the way, by show of hands, are you undergrad? Yeah, okay, good. So you have more time to do damage. You always have to ask, whose interests are served by the structure that is in place? Never develop a fascination with the structure of something without asking, who's benefiting from that structure? That's called the postmodern question. It's always looking at every institution, every structure as a dissemination of power. I can't even believe that we're at a time in America where we're asking the question, is higher education still of value? And I promise you, that's a political question. That's a manufactured question. It's not an ethical one. It's not being driven by an ethical redefinition of the word people. It's being driven by a revenue structure. And somebody has decided that it is no longer worth the taxpayer's investment to open a gate as wide as the American dream to access to public education, the higher ed level. We didn't get here by accident. And so it's a very telling dilemma. Almost every other country on the globe is fighting to expand access to college and universities and higher ed. The ones who aren't, the ones who resist it, have a power structure in place that is threatened at the idea of more people becoming educated. So I appreciate your ethical jumping off point against a political dilemma.
That's a powerful statement. How do you all feel about that? Do you believe that that this is really happening? Like that there's a power structure that does not want to educate people, keep people uneducated?
Yes, actually I do. For me personally, and kind of going off of, I have a BIS degree, I don't even know if they still have those. Went to Tempe University, is at ASU in Tempe. I'm 35, I have a degree. I'm a stay-at-home mom for 3 kids. I now have $17,000 in debt that my husband's active duty. We don't make a whole lot. And so I keep deferring my loans. When are those gonna get paid off? Now I have 3 kids that we're trying to save up to send them to school. I think education should be right for everybody. And when you're, 17, 18, sorry, I was expecting to speak publicly. When you're 17, 18, 19, you only have maybe a small percentage who actually know what they want to do. When they grow up, when they graduate, where they want to go in their life. I was not one of those. And so here I am taking an art history class, here I am taking an economics class, I'm taking all these different classes and still didn't know what I want to do. So now I have a PIS degree in business and theater and $17,000 in debt, and I'm not using it. So there has to be kind of a way for those that don't know what to do to not have to pay $500 for a class that they're not even going to use. They need to be able to focus what they want to do and how they want to graduate. So that's
Thank you for that. So panelists, how do you feel about that? You talked about other countries where education is more accessible and free. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why expand on that? Why we are not doing that here in the United States?
So, I think that we certainly have a disinvestment in higher education here in America, and we've seen that over the last 2 to 3 decades. There's certainly a focused effort on making education more expensive and harder to access here in America. Here in Arizona, just in 2012 or 2013, used to be Representative, now Senator John Kavanaugh, had a bill that would have made all students have to pay $2,000 out of pocket before you were even eligible for financial aid. So, it's obvious to us as the people that hurts are the students that rely upon financial aid, not the students that are coming with their parents paying for it. But I think what we see now is a huge disconnect between legislators and students. Students from ASU, from U of A, from NAU go to the Capitol all the time to try to share their stories about the cost of higher education, and not just the cost of higher education, but the cost associated with it, the total cost of living, the cost of food, the cost of providing housing and transportation. And the responses we get from legislators today is, so what? Don't go to a university, go to community college, but that's what it was created for, is low-income students. And I think that when we're looking at it today, the answer to the original question is no, higher education probably isn't for everybody, but it should be there, and it should be affordable, accessible, and quality for every student that desires a higher education. So I think we are moving away from this investment, but it takes students in this room to become politically active, to vote, to show your legislators that a higher education is something you desire, and put pressure on our elected officials to actually start restoring the funding that's been cut over the last several decades.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. You talk about the need for higher education, how representatives from our own state are telling us, oh, just go to community college. Because from what I've been reading, 63% of jobs by the year 2018 are going to require a bachelor's degree to get the job. So only supplying Arizona students with community college is not exactly a sustainable solution to this problem. And taking a very broad look at this issue, we look throughout societies and history, and we look at what they have and what helped them advance. And for one, it started with resources, and for two, it was technology. And one of my books that I've been reading, Economics and Social Issues, dives into, it states that usually improvements in technology and an economic system result from increasing the scope and depth of its educational processes. So we see that society has advanced because of technology, because they have the educational resources in place. And so what they were trying to get at is that education doesn't necessarily stop problems, but gives us the resources to solve them.
I think Casey said something really important when he distinguished between the ability of everyone to go and let's equate going to school with completing an undergrad degree, because that was really the crux of some of the article. At least one of the articles you read was that there's such a fall off of people who complete their undergrad work in the first 6 years. But what Casey distinguished was everybody ought to have the right, everybody ought to have the opportunity to go. There's never been a time in American history where everybody went to higher ed. It's never happened. But the difference is that between World War II and sometime about 10 years ago, education was actually looked at as the salvation of the United States economy. So after World War II, when the country entered a very natural recession because the war was over, Congress kickstarted the economy with the GI Bill. They devoted public money, massive amounts of taxpayer-funded money, to take all those soldiers coming back and send them to school. That was so education was actually the salvation of the state, of the national economy. It happened again when the Russians launched Sputnik, which was regarded as a threat to national security. How did the United States respond? The National Science Defense Act actually began to invest in sending students to college in what we would describe today as STEM programs. Once again, a threat to national security, whatever you may think about the Russians setting up a really weird-looking satellite. Something perceived as a threat to the United States was met with an investment in education. When did it occur to people that investing in public education, which is essentially the higher ed, universities, NAU, ASU, U of A, when did it occur to people that that wasn't any longer in the interests of national stability and security? When did we separate those two things? Well, we did it over the long course of about 30 years when we decided that all public expenditures, taxpayer, were somehow a bilking of the individual taxpayer. That somehow there wasn't something quite right about asking people to pay for what somebody else did. In fact, in one of the articles you read, there's a statement from an author that talks about our children. It used to be regarded as a community commitment to make public funds available for students not in your own family, not in your own economic background, and not in your own neighborhood to be able to go to school because that benefited the public wealth. We used to believe in a thing called the public wealth. Public education is an enterprise in the public wealth, just as are light streets, county hospitals, fire departments that are 3 minutes away, not 9 minutes away. These are vestiges of the public wealth. So that's what I meant when I said somebody's structure is being served. It's just not necessarily the middle class's interests that are being served. You told a great story, and it's a real one. Some of the other aspects of the articles that we'll probably get into later is, are the predictability. Well, we really need to know before we make this investment, are you going to succeed? We'd like to invest in your college education, but are you going to succeed? And are you going to yield a great enough financial return to make it worthwhile to the taxpayer? We never used to ask those questions. Those are new questions, and I would argue they're manufactured by the same power structure of which Casey spoke, that is deliberately drying up the funding for access to higher ed. Sorry, I really want to apologize.
Well, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Anything that you just got to get out? You have a question?
So, going back to that international thing, historically, a lot of other countries have had higher education as a free resource. But in recent times, I've actually read about how Mexico and the United Kingdom recently decided to make those have tuition fees, for instance, and even time to degree to try to make it so that people weren't a student forever and getting the benefits of university, healthcare, and things like that. So would those be a problem if we tried to make it? Just hypothetically, if we had free college for everyone, how would that play out if we have these other countries that have tried it but are now actually going against it?
You have a tremendous investment necessary to drive public expenditure of sending that many people. You still have to do a calculus though, because not everybody's going to go. As I said, we've never had that in America's history. If you drove that much expenditure into the public wealth of higher education, it's got to come from someplace. You're either going to raise taxes on some structure, or you're going to, on a leap of faith, you're going to believe that grants and scholarships from private businesses, industries are going to ramp up. In fact, the opposite is true. Over the last 20 years, the investments in higher ed grants and scholarships from the private sector has dropped, which is really interesting because taxes have dropped too. So they should have more money to invest, and yet it's drying up. So you would have a huge infusion. Many people believe that would pay for itself with a more educated workforce, with more access to the vertical job opportunity structure. You saw some of the statistics in there. Why is it that the unemployment rate among high school grad only is 8%, but the unemployment rate nationally for those with an undergrad degree is 4%? The theory being the more education you get, the more opportunity you have in the job structure. The driving hypothesis is as people earn more, they contribute more in tax structures, which then helps drive the system, and you get what essentially is a rate of return on the investment. I hope I answered at least a portion of the question.
The thing that I'd add to that is the other thing that we're going to be looking at is the dropout rates of the university students, and if it makes sense for them to keep going to college if they're not graduating within 6 years. But I think free college, reduced tuition college, anything that makes it more affordable is one of the biggest things that we can see, that we can utilize to make sure that students are actually graduating. As you all very well know, for every hour you're in the classroom, you're expected to do 2 hours of homework. So for a student that's doing 15 hours in class, 30 hours of homework, that's a 45-hour week. That's a job, that's a full-time job. But as you all know, you're actually going and working 20 hours or working 40 hours a week. And so if we can make it through free college or reduced tuition where students can actually focus on their education and not focus on everything that goes along with it, providing for their family, having one job or a second job, focusing solely on their education, I think we'd see dropout rates go way down and success and graduation rates go way up.
I think in terms of policy, I don't think we'll ever be able to accomplish free college, but I think something that we can focus on, that we can all work together for, is for affordable tuition. And I think that's something that really should be a value in this country, because the very least that we should be able to do is make sure that people have the opportunity. Because if they don't have the opportunity, we don't know what will ever happen to them. They could have been something great, but we didn't give them that opportunity. And so I think moving forward, I think we really need to concentrate on trying to just get something, because student debt is rising. I think this article puts at 20,000, something from the Wall Street Journal I read puts at $35,000 average student debt among students. That is absolutely immoral. We can't live in a country where it says, oh, you don't want to be a burger flipper anymore? Go get an education. And then the education system tells them, oh, get a job. And the employer says, where's your education? So they're living in a cycle of poverty, and this is not a sustainable solution. Once again, if we want to better this country, if we want to make this country the greatest country on earth, the least we should do is give people the opportunity to make a difference, to enrich their lives, and to contribute to this community.
Let me just pick it up from the point Jimmy made, because his point is valid both economically and ethically. We've kind of already touched on the ethics. So when the public sector uses taxpayer money to send thousands or millions of people to public schools, the government makes that money back, and then they reinvest it. That's one scenario, a little simplified, but it's accurate. Take away the public money, and where do students go to be able to afford the tuition for universities? The grants are drying up. So you said it, they go out and get loans from banks. Who makes the money? It's the private lending industry. Now that's not evil, and that's not bad, and that's the way the world works, but there's a shift. If you really study economic systems in the United States, you will find that the common denominator over the last 30 years is more and more of a shift to the private corporate structure funding. There's nothing wrong with corporate and private structures, but they run on self-interest. All right, that's where they create the structures. So we have a transference of money from the public sector to the private sector, and then those who want the degrees end up borrowing money and further fueling the private sector. And yet the grants and scholarships from the private sector are drying up. So the distinction is a really important one. We're not going to have a model where everybody gets public money probably in the same amount to go. But there can sure be more public money available than there has been, because 30 years ago it existed. and we were doing it.
Okay, looks like we have a question from an audience member or a statement.
I couldn't help but want to chime in. I wasn't actually here necessarily to listen to the event today, but I'm actually originally from Australia. And in Australia, historically, the government has offered loans to students that are interest-free. So you touched on I came over to mention the whole interest issue, but you already brought that up. That's my personal the thing I don't like about taking out loans is I know that I'm going to be paying so much interest, and that's what's ultimately going to screw me. Before I get out of school, I'm already going to have my tuition.
Important economic principle.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about economics, and I have to say that I don't mind paying $35,000 or having some kind of $35,000 loan that I have to pay off. If the interest rate was 0, that would be cool. I mean, people spend more on cars. Let's talk about values. I value an education. I've got a junky car that works really well, and I would rather be paying off a $35,000 debt for an amazing education at the Walter Cronkite School than I would be paying for a stupid car. But that's just my values. But interest, the whole interest economic side of it is what frustrates me, and I also just don't know a lot about it, but I just know that's what is different between the States and Australia. You can graduate in Australia, have like $8,000 a year tuition times however many years you're at school, and then you just pay back the government interest-free. They take it out of your paycheck in increments, and you don't really have to worry about it.
You know, just to add to that point, I agree, the free education, you know, it'd be wonderful, it's kind of a dream, but other states are trying some other things like pay it forward in Oregon, but to the interest point, you know, I completely feel your pain there. I graduated 5 years ago, I've been paying every month for 5 years, my total amount is still exactly the same where it was 5 years ago. To the economic viewpoint, exactly, I'm 100% with them on that. I think that, you know, we're foregoing buying cars, we're foregoing buying homes. We're not starting families when we're graduating. All of these things are economic engines, you know, that feed into our economy, that raise the tax revenue, that can go right back into education. So it's a vicious cycle, you know, that students are going through right now that we have to fight back to get out of.
And I think you both talked about the interest, and you did too. And that is something that, you know, like you mentioned, the private sector, the banks, their main goal is to, you know, maximize their profits. So that's why we're in this situation, and we need to do something to change that. And what can we do?
And I don't for a minute want to vilify the private sector or banks or lending institutions, because remember, they hold on to that money, and I don't buy the whole job creator nonsense, but there are a lot of jobs powered by that engine and by that system. It's not that they shouldn't exist, that they shouldn't recoup profits from all that. It's that the system is out of balance compared to how it was just a few decades ago, when America was at its absolute strongest. You have to listen to this, because the rationale for all of this is that keeping taxes as low as they can possibly be benefits you. When in reality, if you launch a $10 billion tax cut across the country, politicians will always do. They'll always use the highest number possible. Let's say it's an income tax cut. It's going to be based on the structure of the income tax right now. The top 1% or 5% income earners are going to see enough money to buy a Ferrari, or at least a Maserati. The average earning middle class family is going to see a couple $100. And I know this because I was actively involved in a policy of a 3-year suspension of a property tax in Arizona when Janet Napolitano was governor, and we did the metrics. And for the average income earning family in Arizona, the tax cut for those 3 years each year was going to be about $200. Oh boy, you can't do anything with that. But for the top 1% of income earners, $92,000. All right? So the idea being that the rhetoric is out there, always driving the idea that taxes have to be low, low, low. For the middle class, it actually ends up hurting us in the end. because of the drying up of other services and available resources. This guy's really good.
This is kind of going off what Jimmy was saying earlier, so I'll direct it towards him, but you were talking about not doing free tuition, but affordable tuition. And there are always, at least for my high school, there are people that don't necessarily want to go to college. They choose to opt out. And if you created an affordable tuition situation, I'm just wondering what the incentive would be for those students to go to college, because in my high school, my senior year, there was a second wave of budget cuts across. I was from the Scottsdale Unified School District. We lost I know of at least 2 teachers from the arts program. I was in one of the classes, and a lot of people rely on those classes a lot, going to the arts. Those are more of the fun classes instead of just getting drilled with economics, history, English, all those things. So some kids might be a little turned off because they're not enjoying school as much. So I'm wondering what your incentive is for students. If you gave them an affordable tuition, what's the incentive to get them to college?
Give me a moment, I think I'm gonna draft that.
Okay, you have a question right here in front? Okay, a statement?
I think we should really talk about privilege, and that also has a lot to do with the mentality of a lot of students, especially POC, people of color. This is a topic that a lot of people don't really like to go on because there's so many dimensions to it and different things about it. But it's definitely a very big connection to the problem with our education system in America in general. So, yeah.
I think there's someone else. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
So to respond to both of the questions, so the first question for Josh, I think that, I was one of those students in high school. I did not get good grades in high school. I was a first generation college student. Neither of my parents went to college. I knew at a very early age that neither of them were going to contribute to me going to college. And as a first generation college student, I had no idea about financial aid. It wasn't even, access to college. I just, financial aid didn't even exist in my mind. And so I ended up in the military, but I think had I known that there was avenues out there to get funding for college, I think I would have been a little bit more motivated to do that. But on the privilege aspect of that, I ended up in the military and before I went to college, and so I had, a little different route. But I think when we look at policies across America, we look at things and people argue, well, what are the things that are going to motivate students to graduate high school and go to college? And tuition equity for undocumented students is one of those issues. They have the Latino students have one of the highest dropout rates nationally. But when we look at states that have passed tuition equity, which allows undocumented students the right to go to higher education, those same students that are going to benefit from tuition equity, we're seeing that their graduation rates for high school are going up. When you give a student the ability to dream, they're going to realize that dream and they're going to prove to us that they deserve a higher education, that they deserve to go. And so, I hate to oversimplify it, but I think, we just need to show students that they have the ability to do that. We believe in them and make sure that we give them a path to do that, whether it's tuition equity or affordability.
And really come back to your point, Josh, what might drive them to go through college. Listen to this statistic from the Wall Street Journal. During the economic crisis, those who were just high school graduates, their unemployment rates went up to 16%. For those with a 4-year degree, theirs only went up to 4.5. You see a massive amount of economics lifestyles and really give them the opportunity to take a job and to really hang on to it instead of just being cut immediately. And so I think having an understanding of economic stability for them might be a good driver. But also going back to Casey's point, being able to dream and to know that you can make it, because that's what education provides for you, is the opportunity to make your voice heard, to really do something bigger than yourself and for your community. And so when I think students learn that they can do that and they can achieve that, I think it gives them motivation. I think it gives them inspiration. Because, you know, all the great movies you watch aren't always just about one person. They're about a team of people. They're about a group of people who want to win a prize or a championship or make a difference or change society. And so that's what you can really see. So not only economically as a driver, but I also think, as Casey said, it's inspiration as a driver.
Well, one last point to kind of the work that Andrew does too is I think, you know, on a more micro viewpoint, is we need quality teachers in our high schools. I think, you know, when we had quality funding for our high schools, our inner city schools need to be well funded, and those students need to have the same opportunities as the students that are going to, you know, wealthier, more affluent high schools. And I think that when it comes down to the teachers, I spoke about my high school experience and not really thinking about college, and it was one teacher that really came back to me, and I ended up going back to community college and taking him for several of my writing classes. And I think having those quality teachers that are there all the way through your 4 years that build relationships, build trust in you, and can encourage you is huge. And so, you know, the same disinvestment we've had in higher education, we've seen in K through 12. And if we restore funding in K through 12 and make sure we have quality teachers that are preparing our students, I think better opportunity to go to college as well.
So we're going to take a couple more questions, then we have to move on to the next article.
Yeah, so I just want to say that like, the teacher that was actually he left actually because he wasn't getting the program was getting enough funding. He was my journalism teacher and a student at the journalism school. And honestly, the one class where I really used things from high school was my journalism class. I basically relearned different formats for English. I don't take history because that doesn't pertain to my major. Science, I'm relearning science here. I mean, it didn't like overflow into college. I was in a class that I really needed. And to see classes like that getting cut, they're so important to people's lives in general. And they have lessons within them. So I just think that in general, they need to stay in schools, especially in high school, because the stepping stone to college is such a difference, but they need that.
Hi, my name is Zia Tyrie. So this is a bit non-tangential to community and items like that. I just wanted to touch back on the tax portion, and I have to ask the age-old question: how can we ensure where our taxpayer money goes? I'm from a lower middle class family, as is most of America. And even even the slightest income tax, deduction from my mom's paycheck is devastating to my family. And even devastating trying to come to ASU and having to work 3 jobs, et cetera. But, basically my question is, what can we do besides voting, coming to places like this to hold not only legislatures accountable, but is there a way that we can incentivize people to ensure that not only do they pay those taxes, but are okay with paying them?
There are a lot of things that happen in the legislative process to create loopholes to make sure that those that are most able to pay taxes are actually paying very little. In fact, I haven't absolutely confirmed the stat, but it keeps coming up in a lot of readings I'm doing lately. I think it's at least 1 out of 5 of the top corporations earning in Arizona aren't paying anything more than the minimum perfunctory corporate income tax because they pay lobbyists to go in and create loopholes in the statute. So we're going to set the tax rate at this percent for this income, give a personal income tax, and we also have a corporate income tax. And then a lobbyist comes through, a lot of money, a lot of influence, and says, well, yeah, we're going to do that except for this industry. And decades go by, and pretty soon you got a tax code that's full of more loopholes than it is actual obligation. So closing loopholes is part of the answer, and it's part of the threat. Because somebody wanted those loopholes. Somebody wanted every single one of those loopholes that was created. I always love this because what happens is 30 years go by and people go, our tax structure is so dang complicated. You know that you couldn't explain it to the average Joe? Well, good. Because I've seen the average Joe in action, and frankly, I don't think I want a tax code that the average Joe can understand. But apart from that, it happened one little piece at a time. So if you ask, other than voting, That's a tough one, because voting is like the #1 answer. But, you know, you do have to have some way, and it sounds to me, I know Casey pretty well. I know he's been involved in collective action, and I think I can pretty well bet that Jimmy has, and it's part of my work too. Other than the vote, you've got to create public dialogue about where tax money goes to resist that narrative I was talking about, where we believe instinctively, well, it's a Bill Gates, something that's being stolen from me, it's something that's being taken from me. Because what we don't see is, you know, you talked about your family's sensitivity to even the slightest tax increase. Fair enough. But if that money were going where it needed to go, you'd be getting it back on the other side in terms of services that were provided to you for which you were not paying as much.
We'll take one more question.
Hi, I'm Sarah. This is kind of very nebulous, so I hope the question comes out of it. But when you brought up voting, I can't help but think how, you know, like young people historically don't vote as much as other ages do. And I'm thinking of this generational gap that I kind of see existing, at least in the rhetoric that we're hearing from politicians, like older people that, like, oh, I came up from nothing, like, you can do it too. But, you know, college is much more expensive now than it was then. So my question is, do you see change happening with regards to this issue with, like, the generational shift, or is there a tipping point?
No, I don't see any change coming at all. I'll tell you why. In the 2014 election, Arizona registered some of the lowest voter turnout across all demographics since the 1940s. 40-some% of people that were eligible to vote in Arizona opted to vote. All right? Don't hold yourselves too guilty, because the problem transcends age. All right? You want to vote? Get out there and vote. Absolutely, it's essential. We have huge percentages of the population in every demographic that are choosing not to vote. My fear then is it's become a pervasive human behavior in a system where the vote is guaranteed. You talked about, you know, the incentive to go to school if it's already paid for. What's the incentive to vote? You know, it's sitting there waiting for you every time. It's like what we do with commercials. We just mute the television and we change the channel. And there are people in this country that complain, well, I don't think I get in the car and cast my vote. And you know, there are countries where like there are people dying still in 2015. They're paying for the right to vote with their lives. So I think it's much more pervasive than just an age barrier. I think it's an attitudinal barrier. By the way, most of the research on the impact of negative campaigning, you know, where you just trash the hell out of your opponent and you never say really what you stand for, the reason you see so much of that is because it's effective. It works. It's terrible. It works. But the byproduct is, over time, it has lowered the percentage of people who vote because they don't believe there's anybody good out there to vote for. And the worst thing about all that is there's reason to believe that was a calculated impact of the negative campaigning. Because if you reduce the number of people voting, it's easier to control the number who are voting.
I think something big that the Andrew Goodman Foundation concentrates on, that's where I work, and my friend Zachary McCutcheon here, he works there as well. We really work hard to make sure that students are registered to vote and really have their voices heard. And the importance of that, there are just so many reasons that you can talk to somebody about how important it is. And you look back through history, and even today, people dying for that right to vote. You look at Martin Luther King. You know, they didn't just make Selma a movie just to be like, oh, hey, let's go to the movies and watch something. Selma was a movie about fighting for that right to vote. And you look at every war throughout American history, even the very first war, it was about a war to have representation through voting. And so we see throughout history, and through education, that voting is a priority. And voting is something that is almost spiritual, because when you vote, everyone that's died for that right, everyone that's given blood for that right, everyone who's put hard work into that, they're honored on that. And so when you take it from that very broad perspective, voting is, to me, very personal and very spiritual, to really honor those people. And so I think through education, we can really help to get more people voting and have our voices heard. And this next year, I tell you what, we are going to make sure our legislature knows that the young people in the state are voting. Because we're tired of not being represented. We're tired of them not working for us. We're here, we're going to make a difference. We're going to change the system that's putting us under. And we're going to make a difference.
So voting is something very important to me, as well as higher education. Really, I spent my entire career working with college students to register and to vote to make sure that they have a good voting bloc in the legislature. We know only two things influence legislators, and that's votes and money. And, you know, we can't compete with the private prisons when it comes to money, so that's why we're one of the handful of states that fund prisoners more than we do students. However, there is evidence out there that when students register, when students turn out, it benefits you. In the intro, they said I came from Oregon, and that's kind of where I began my career. And I remember in 2009, right at the height of the recession, and higher education was getting gutted all over the nation. In Oregon, we set the national record in 2009 going into the 2010 elections for both voter registration and youth voter turnout. This was 2010, and youth in Oregon outvoted seniors. What that meant for us in the following legislative session in 2011 was the governor went to every agency in the state and asked them to produce a budget that showed a 3% cut. The one agency that got funded higher was education. So, you know, as our song over there goes, as long as students are registering, educating themselves, and turning out, you're going to be loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. And I guarantee you that your voting bloc together can make substantial change, especially when it comes to funding for our universities.
You know, you mentioned privilege, and we barely scratched the surface. There are two great threats to privilege. Because privilege sits at the top of the structures that are created, and the role of the structure is to protect the privilege. That's what all structures do. And the two great threats are education and voting. Now, in Casey's background, he led the Student Association at a time when we were trying to run a ballot initiative here in Arizona that would have put millions of dollars into the K-12 system and higher ed. And to reward the efforts of the Student Association that got out there and tried to get as many students voting as possible in favor of this, a conservative group, and I don't mean that by the generic political orientation, but I mean a very particular group within the structure, came after the organization to get more and more students voting. So voting is always a threat to somebody that wants to control the direction of policy.
That's like one of the things that I do because I don't work. So, like, you know, just because I'm not utilizing my degree doesn't mean I don't believe in education. I think education, the more you know, the better you do, and the more you can teach others. I had about 6 friends who are at my age and older who are teachers, and they're tired. They're tired of teaching. They are and they're amazing, inspirational teachers. And they're already getting burned out within 5 years, and they still have student loans. A friend of mine was able to make a deal as long as she stayed as a teacher for the next 10 years, that she wouldn't have to pay off her student loans. And after like 4 years already, now she has to teach another 10 years, and she's already getting burned out. She's 35, she's my age. She has a daughter, you know, but that was the deal that she cut to get rid of her student loans. So it's like, education has to be a right. If you want to go, you should be able to go. I still love learning. I read every single day. You know, I chase after my twins and my 4-year-old, you know, but I still find that time to read and to learn and to educate myself, so that way I can be a better, hopefully inspiration for my kids to be able to want to go to school, and hopefully they'll be able to afford to go to school. So, know better, do better.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next article.
So the next article is called, and it's in your packet, Plan B, Skip College. So if you want to go ahead and take a couple of minutes to read that out. And the summary is right behind us as well. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and do 1 more minute and then we'll begin. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. If somebody has any questions about the article or anything related to the article that you'd like to ask one of our panel members, we have Veronica that will go around with the microphone. Okay, there's someone in the middle that has their hand raised.
Hi again. So I am a sophomore and I'm going to be going into the nursing clinical program here at ASU. But I really like the idea that they're posing here with apprenticeship training. But as a nurse, if they're actually really pushing for more people with bachelor degrees, more nurse practitioners, et cetera, so although I like the apprenticeship training and, you know, the possibility for a higher quality vocational training, I was wondering if anyone here would think, you know, is there a prereq for even being a pharmacy assistant, as they say, because, you know, you have to have some sort of basis knowledge to go into, especially a clinical care field such as this one.
What struck me about this article was the idea that we're going to benefit people by sort of weeding them out and ushering them into a different corridor, which admittedly may be right for some, but I just keep coming back to whose interests are served when you diminish the pool of those that you're encouraging to go higher ed. We talked a lot about the financial aspects of that already. And remember the part of the article that talked about well, there's other skills, you know. Maybe you don't need maybe you don't need 9 units in your undergrad program on Shakespeare the way I had, or someone on